Welcome back to another edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. I'm Raffi, as always, joined by Davian. Davian, we are 2 weeks into the NFL season. Things have started off lovely for the Atlanta Falcons, the team that I unfortunately have the joy of rooting for. They've started 0-1. Big Kirko did not wake up dripping like this. And the Falcons might fall to 0-2 if they fail to beat the Eagles this Monday night as we are recording this podcast. But throwing away my relationship with the Falcons aside, and to get things kickstarted, as always, Davian, how are you doing today?
I've been doing great. Great to talk to you, Rafi, as always. Look, this NFL season has been fairly exciting. Look, we had so many upsets this past week. Just pretty awesome. In college football itself, we almost had like a bunch of upsets happen. Some of them did, some of them didn't. I'm just really excited about this NFL season and this college football season. I feel like anything can happen in either or. We see the downfall of the Cowboys. We're seeing the Texans, steadily chugging along. I feel like you're seeing a lot of things that some people expected, some people didn't, and it's pretty exciting. My Patriots personally lost to the Seahawks. It was an overtime loss, which it's kind of tough, but I feel like the team played well. Maybe the defense had a hiccup at the end, but overall, I'm happy with how the team's been playing, especially with the involvement of Hunter Henry after paying him for so long and not really seeing the results from him. We're finally seeing that the reason why he was at one point considered one of the best tight ends in the NFL. But with that, Rafi, kicking it back to you, how have you been?
Yeah, I'm doing great, and hopefully to those listening to the podcast, watching, you guys feel that my audio is a little better. So just got a mic. We'll see how this comes out in post production, but yeah, we'll see what goes on. Aside from that, doing well. Traveled to Boston this past weekend to watch the Patriots. No, I'm kidding. I did not go to watch. I think they played in Seattle too, but
Yeah.
I did go to Boston for stuff, so that was fun. But now I'm back in the great state of Illinois, city of Chicago, where people can't throw a football. So I'm doing
Yep.
great overall. And also, since we unfortunately the last podcast unfortunately had to be scrapped due to issues with the recording, I will say this now just to make sure that it's on the podcast for sure. Notre Dame lost. I know. They beat Purdue. They beat the doors off them. I get it. But you still lost to NIU. And I still have no respect for this. This team has no respect. I have no respect for them. They're overrated. And once and for all, I really hope that they lose at least one more game, because then that's going to fully just, we're done with the talk of Notre Dame in the college football playoff. And yeah, the team, they're overrated every year.
Yeah. Um, I completely agree with you on that. Speaking about overrated, Georgia, what was that performance against Kentucky? You beat them
Yeah.
by a singular point. That was pretty
No,
sad.
but it wasn't. Sorry to cut you off, but it wasn't the fact that they beat them by a singular point. But it's the fact that they put up 13 points and barely, like, they won 13-12, and we can talk about, the defense played well. But again, and I'm sure you're going to mention this too and back me up on this. Kentucky just got blown out by South Carolina a week
Yep.
ago.
Yep.
Like, the Kentucky team
Yep.
is not good, and for them to somehow be literally on upset alert with Georgia, it's surprising. And I can't help but also feel too that yes, Georgia did wind up beating Clemson by 30-ish points. But let's not forget, too, that that game at half was Georgia 6, Clemson 3. And what do we see? Kentucky, Georgia? Right at half, Kentucky 6, Georgia 3. Georgia, solid team. I still think they're the second best team in the country behind Texas, especially after what they did versus Michigan. But Georgia's having some issues getting started early. And I think once they play a team like Alabama, which they will in not this week, upcoming weekend, but the next upcoming weekend, they can't be starting slow against Alabama. Otherwise, they're going to fall way too far behind.
I completely agree with you on that. And I don't think I even have much more to add. You can't start off slow against some of these high juggernaut teams, which Bama is slowly starting to become. And I'm sure if Theodore was on this podcast, he'd be rambling about how great Bama is playing and whatnot. But Yeah, I mean, beyond that, I don't think that there's much to talk about in terms of Georgia. I guess in terms of other things that were very interesting was we really got to see Archie Manning really play for the first time. Yes, it wasn't against a great team in the University of Texas State or UTSA, but it was still impressive, right? We finally have a mobile Manning. Like, who would have thought that a Manning would actually be able to scramble outside of the pocket? Besides, one in case scenario where Payne and Eli both did it here and there. So I'm really excited for this Archie Manning era, but I don't want it to overshadow Quinn Ewers if he comes back. Because my worry is Quinn Ewers is going to come back, Texas is going to lose a game or something of that sort, or he's not going to play that great. And then there's going to be calls for his head and calls for Archie to be brought in. And as great as Archie is, I'm not sure if he's ready to take over this team yet. He is only a sophomore, right? And leading now number one rated team in America is definitely something very stressful and something that he will need to get really adapted to. I'm not sure about the status report of Quinn Ewers' injury. I haven't been really keeping up with that, but I hope he comes back quick. I hope he comes back fast because I don't know how well this Texas team will be able to play with Archie, because I don't know how many first team reps he was really getting over the offseason.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, too, it seems like Quinn Ewers' injury isn't going to be too serious. I don't think it's going to be anything where he's going to be missing a significant amount of time. So I think this is a situation that low-key could work out for Texas. You don't have too many crazy opponents for at least the next couple weeks. So then you wind up getting Quinn Ewers healthy. The big date, obviously, is mid-October. That's when you'd like him back because that's when Texas plays Georgia, arguably in a matchup that we might see three times this year with just how good Georgia and Texas both are. So I don't think it's a bad thing. You get Archie Manning's, you get his feet wet into, not Archie Manning, Manning. You get his feet, yeah, it is Archie Manning. Sorry. You get his feet wet. He gets a little bit used to how things are. This upcoming week, Texas plays UL Monroe. I would start Manning here. Then they also play Mississippi State, which is they're absolutely buns this year. So I don't think it hurts really to you give Quinn Ewers all the time in the world because again for Texas this year it's all about win the national championship or go home. So I think if you're Texas, you just sit out Quinn Ewers for the next 2 weeks, make sure he's fully recovered for Bedlam, and then obviously the next week versus Georgia because it certainly starts to ramp up those 2 weeks, and you wouldn't want Quinn Ewers to potentially miss more time than he's likely already going to and potentially re-injure his abdomen. But at the end of the day, this is scary. One could only imagine now if Manning has another kid, if he has a kid, he's going to be very mobile and then probably have a rocket arm, etc. We've really started to, each generation of Mannings is getting more and more OP. So this next Manning kid in the 2050s, when we're still doing this podcast, this guy is going to, this little Manning is going to be absolutely amazing. Let's move on to two teams that I at least want to shout out for the fact that they started off the season a little rocky, but I think that they've certainly gone back on track, and that's Bama and Oregon. Oregon blowing out their former Pac-12 compadre, Oregon State. Oregon blew out Oregon. Oh my gosh. Oregon blowing out Oregon State in this matchup just completely worked them. This was a matchup rivalry over the past couple years that's been quite close overall. So to see Oregon just completely destroy Oregon State was at least a good thing for Oregon fans after two back-to-back weeks where they certainly were on upset watch for most of those two respective games. And then Alabama going to Wisconsin, a team that, yes, they aren't in the upper tiers, the upper echelon of the Big Ten, but they still blow the doors off Wisconsin at Wisconsin. I think those two teams really needed a good week and a convincing win, and I think both teams accomplished that and are back to, okay, these teams are contending for a national championship.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that take. I really feel that Oregon finally looks like a very solid team, and I think they could go. I think we mentioned this, in our predictions that they could do very well. Another team I did want to mention as well is Boston College. Only losing by 6 to Mizzou is quite a feat, and I would put Boston College on ACC watch, just in case, because you never know what happens. This is college football at the end of the day. And they've been looking very, very good, especially their defense. So, we'll see what happens with that. But Rafi, do you have any thoughts on Boston College, or you think it's just the fluke that's happening?
I think they played really well versus Mizzou. I think that's pretty cut and dry. Just they went into a very tough environment and made it very tough for Mizzou to pull ahead. The SEC is going to be really good this year. I know you asked me about BC, but I just want to also transition to the fact that the SEC with Tennessee, Ole Miss, Alabama, and now you see Mizzou. You already have Georgia and Texas. This is going to be a really fun year for the SEC. We have a
Yep.
ton of very good teams, and this doesn't even include Oklahoma, who's a top 15 ranked team this year. And then going to BC, that wouldn't be too surprising. I still think Miami is the best ACC school this year. Right behind them is going to be Clemson, so maybe you could put BC right after them. But I think the big story, though, regardless coming out of the ACC, is Florida State is completely just utter dog poop per se. Sorry, not to drop any vulgar language per se, but I think Florida State fans would be the first to drop any language over how their season started, especially after a lot of people felt that this was going to be a revenge short type of year for Florida State. Yes, they lose Jordan Travis. Yes, they lose a bunch of pieces on offense and on defense. Keon Coleman, wide receiver, who's now on the Buffalo Bills. But for the season to start 0-3, Florida State is they were done after week 2, but it's so over and it's a complete dumpster fire right now at Florida State.
Yep. I agree with that. That what's happening in Florida is pretty sad, I will say.
Moving
Um,
on to where DJ Uyunglele will not be playing, and that is the NFL. Let's move into the NFL and talk about some of the results for the past 2 weeks. I think one of the main things just to talk about is just how a lot of the rookie quarterbacks who are starting, so that is Bo Nix, Caleb Williams, and Jane Daniels, have all particularly been struggling a lot out the gate. Jane Daniels, arguably probably the best out of the three. Caleb Williams with back-to-back weeks throwing under 200 yards. Bo Nix being called Bo Picks now, throwing some very bad throws that wound up being interceptions. Davian, what are your thoughts so far on these three young quarterbacks? I'm going to give my 2 cents on Caleb Williams after you because I've seen it ground zero in Chicago and all
yeah.
the thoughts of Caleb Williams. But I want to hear your thoughts first on these three quarterbacks because once again, at the end of the day, it's only week 2 of their NFL careers. They're not bust by any means, at least at this point. Things can certainly get better, but at least to start the gate, at the start of the gate, none of these quarterbacks have really done anything to impress anyone.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to agree with that. I don't think that a lot of them have shown anything that's very impressive. I'm gonna start off with the bright side, which is Jaden Daniels. I think he's actually been playing very, very well. I mean, he beat a Giants team, which yes, regardless, the Giants team isn't good, but their offense looked a lot better, so I'll give them that perks. But this, the Commanders' offense was played very well. I mean, going 23 for 29 for over 200 yards really speaks volume to. Yes, he's not this superstar QB, but he's a good rookie QB, and he's really showing that right now. I feel reminds me a lot of like how Mac Jones is performing, like when he was in his rookie year, where he was performing very well, but wasn't wow, like these numbers are off the charts. Their numbers are very good for a rookie. Caleb Williams' story is, a bit different. I feel like he hasn't been performing as great, but I think week by week you've seen some small improvements, which is what you want to see from a QB. I feel like Caleb Williams was a prospect that you knew, was kind of had like a very high ceiling, given his athleticism, given his speed and his mobility and his arm. So I think give him a few weeks and get him adjusted. But at the end of the day, it all goes down to the offensive line, and we've seen it absolutely be terrible across the league, where the offensive line is not holding up and these QBs can't throw the dang ball. And I feel like that's the biggest concern, that you're setting these QBs up for failure. And that's why you need to really have a system where you don't bring a rookie QB into a broken system. Maybe you sit them and then figure out if the system could work for the rookie QB, and then you start them. AKA, you don't do what the Panthers did. And Rafi, you and I are both very heated about this Panthers topic, so We're going to talk about that later. But Rafi, first, let me get your thoughts on these QBs.
Yeah, at the end of the day, Caleb Williams has shown flashes of the player that he can become, which is very encouraging for Bears fans. But at the end of the day, too, the offensive line is completely terrible. And it's funny, too, because I didn't realize this actually until earlier today. But Ryan Poles was a former offensive lineman, the current GM of the Chicago Bears. And so you'd think that he would put an emphasis on constructing a good offensive line for Caleb Williams entering his rookie year. He's done a great job assembling other pieces: Keenan Allen, Roma Dunze, DJ Moore. He has plenty of weapons to work with. DeAndre Swift has been not ideal to start the year, but still, you understand the thought process of bringing him in as your starting running back. And Montez Sweat and the rest of the defense is looking very good for the Bears, along with the special teams. But we've talked about this before. You win football games through the trenches, and the Chicago Bears have arguably had one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL this year. They're not giving enough time for Caleb Williams to show off. It's one thing being athletic in your own sense where, okay, if you're in a pinch, you can make something happen with your legs, or, oh, you can make a great throw. And he's shown that on a couple occasions. But when you only have 2 seconds in the pocket to throw the ball, you're not going to be getting the best product. That you're not going to be playing to your upwards potential if you're Caleb Williams. Now, this also goes with the fact that he's still a rookie. This is still his second game in the NFL. He's not going up against Pac-12 defenses. Things are going to be a little different for Caleb Williams. He's going to have to adjust. He hasn't been amazing too by any means, but it's very concerning to see how bad the offensive line has been for the Bears. And then moving into Denver, once again, Bo Nix. The team isn't surrounded at all by many good pieces. Cortland Sutton's been not ideal, but he can certainly be better to help out Bo Nix. The run game has been very bad. And once again, the offensive line. I'd say if I've learned anything, and if I were an NFL GM and my team needed a quarterback, I think the main priority that I would put first is building a solid offensive line. Maybe get like a solid weapon at wide receiver or a solid player too. But I think what the Falcons have done, and although it hasn't shown yet, because Kirk Cousins I think is still recovering from his Achilles injury, he was very immobile last week versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they went up against TJ Watt. But I like the idea that they added some weapons. They got Bijan Robinson, Drake London, Kyle Pitts in the draft for weapons. But the Falcons have always had a solid offensive line too throughout the past couple of years. And then you put in that quarterback. Then you also draft your guy, Michael Penix Jr. So Penix Jr. is now sitting out for this year in all likelihood. Maybe
Yeah.
it's a game or two if the Falcons are bound to go 7-10 for the 5,000 straight year. But then he comes next year. He has a couple games under his belt. The offensive line, I don't expect really anything to change too much from this year to next year with the Falcons' offensive line. And the offensive line is a top 10 unit overall. So I really like the way that the Falcons are positioned. And again, coming back and tying a knot on, putting a bow on this whole conversation. If there's a team or there's a GM and they're like, oh shoot, I need a quarterback, I think the first priority is to build that offensive line out. We saw with Joe Burrow too. This should have been a lesson that NFL teams took away from Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow starts his rookie year, gets injured because his offensive line was putrid. What does their GM do? They beef out the offensive line, and that next year the Bengals go on a very deep playoff run and have consistently been a playoff team for the past couple of years based on their, it's not a top 10 unit, but it's definitely an above league average unit, which has been good enough for Joe Burrow to still succeed as the quarterback of the Bengals. So at the end of the day, you got to build through the trenches if you're building a roster, and hopefully more teams make note of this, because otherwise there's no point in taking a quarterback first overall. It doesn't matter what quarterback you take or who it is, what their name is, what their potential is. If you don't surround them and don't give them time to throw the ball and process things, you're setting that player up for failure. And we can get right into the Bryce Young conversation too. Another young player who's a literal case study as well of, you traded CMC, you traded DJ Moore, you traded Brian Burns, don't get any first round picks for any of those players. And then you bottom out, you get Bryce Young trading a bunch of picks to the Bears, and you've thrown this man in a situation that he can't win. You turn to him, you start Andy Dalton the first couple weeks last year, then you turn to him for the rest of the year. it's clear to me at this point that he's lost all of his confidence. He doesn't seem capable of throwing. This past week, for example, he did not throw a ball more than 15 yards
Yeah.
from the line of scrimmage. It's clear that his confidence is shattered, and I can't help but think that the Panthers really just set him up for failure, threw him into the fire, and I hope that he can turn it around, but part of me is just nervous that you've completely destroyed his confidence and there's nothing you can do. Now he's benched as well for Andy Dalton. In my mind, Davian, all they should have done last year was just had Andy Dalton just be the starter. But because they traded the first round pick, I think they tried jumping the gun, tried to be a good enough team, potentially competing for a playoff spot, and this is completely blown up in their face. And it's really unfortunate to what they've done to Bryce Young.
Yeah, I mean, like, look, this is a guy who had so much potential, and I feel like he was, like, people say, like, oh, look at C.J. Stroud versus Bryce Young. I'm sorry, those are two completely different different organizations, and what I mean by different organizations is one that's under the one that isn't.
If the Panthers had taken C.J. Stroud, we'd be having the same exact conversation with C.J. Stroud instead of Bryce Young. They could have drafted Caleb Williams and put him in this situation. The same thing. Patrick Mahomes. They could have drafted Patrick Mahomes, had rookie Patrick Mahomes. The same situation would be unfolding.
Exactly.
You need to be such an elite and generational type of quarterback to have made something out of the past 18 weeks of being a Panthers quarterback. Like, you'd have to be so utterly amazing, and I've never seen a quarterback that's been that good to where they can turn a literal dumpster fire into a half watchable team.
Yep. No, I completely agree with that. And I think that it's just sad. It's just really just sad. I'm at a loss of words. It's just I saw that news come out today, and I just thought, like, wow, this kid's career is basically over, right? Because at the end of the day, like, this guy's so young, you could almost call him a kid. And it's just, I hope that he gets that starting position later on, and the Panthers are able to figure something out. But this is just a very terrible situation.
At the end of the day, too, just to wrap up this talk about Bryce Young, I think it's clear that the Panthers have no idea what they're doing. I don't think they have a plan at all. They fired their head coach last year, Frank Reich. I believe it was 13, 14 games into the season. There's the right people upset with their current head coach. I just think that the Panthers right now are a complete dumpster fire, and firing everyone, I don't know if that's enough right now. If you could fire the owner, I'd fire the owner as well. But that'll do it for this week's Panthers Are Garbage Talk. Moving on, we can still touch on some former Panthers, which one of them is Christian McCaffrey dealing with Achilles tendonitis. I deal with Achilles injuries all the time too. I've been dealing with stuff as well. This is not a fun thing to deal with. I'm no doctor, but I'm going through my own Achilles issues. The Achilles having issues with that, it's not something where it's a 1 week or like a set timeline. There are people saying that it might be more than 6 weeks for Christian McCaffrey. And also, at the end of the day, too, if I'm a Niners front office manager or I'm the coach, etc., I think George Mason has shown enough to where I don't have too many concerns about sitting Christian McCaffrey for multiple weeks.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that. I think you sit him for a while and let him really just kind of get back to full health, because I think that this is an injury which can easily come up again, and you need him healthy, especially for the playoffs. Like, yes, they didn't play well last week against the Vikings, but I think that was mostly a fluke of the game. It wasn't really just kind of, I didn't see anything that I felt was, okay, this is detrimental. This team is just bad. And I think that, I think just injuries in general, you really need to rest a lot of your players until they get back to full health, especially with things such as Achilles. Of course, another injury is concussions. And I feel like what we saw with Tua was just sad. I mean, again, he gets another concussion, again, another very serious reaction. And it's, there's questions about whether he should retire or not. And as much as I think one way, I think that I, in my position, shouldn't be really commenting on whether you should retire or not. I think as a person of, saying like caring about his health, of course I would say retire. But then I could say that about every NFL player, right? It's a dangerous game. You play the game and you take the risks. And sometimes those risks are too much. And I feel like that might be that for Tua right now. But at the end of the day, the person who should be making this decision on whether to retire or not should be Tua and his doctors. It should be nobody else. It should be nobody else, really. We've seen so many terrible injuries, right? We see a concussion, we see we think CTE, we think this, we think that, right? But then we've seen so many other injuries that happen to other parts of the body, but we just don't really kind of, in our mind, we don't really grasp it. Like the ACL injury, right? Like the ACL injury, like a torn ACL is one of the worst injuries you could get to your body. And yes, I guess it heals quickly, but your body's never really the same. And then a lot of these players at the end of their career develop arthritis, right? Just like Todd Gurley did. And, so we can't just be, turning one eye on, injuries to the knees and the legs and then saying like, oh, concussions are such a, like if you get a concussion, you should retire. Right. But I think that I'm happy to see that NFL fans are way more caring. I think that if this was 30, 40 years ago, this would have been like, oh, he's fine. He'll be back in there a week or two. I think that one thing I'd like to see from Tua is for him to start wearing the Guardian cap. I think that's it's not ugly, right? It provides more health. Yes, it might be hot in there, but at the end of the day, right, I feel like your safety should come first. And so those are my thoughts. And Raffi, I'd love to hear yours.
First off, I do want to just disagree with you a little bit and just say that I think there's a difference between concussions and tearing your ACL.
No, I mean, of course
Obviously,
there is. Yeah.
obviously there's mental things that happen when you're recovering from an injury and dealing with injuries, but we've seen like CTE is no joke, and we've seen
No,
what
it's
happens
very
with
real. Yeah.
concussions, what they do to someone's mind, and the mind is so much more like, and this is like we don't want to get into the discussion of, oh, this injury is more important than another injury, but the long-term effects that CT and concussions can have, I think outweighs anything like an ACL, because ACL, it'll recover. Yeah, it won't be the same. Yes, arthritis definitely develops a lot in NFL players, but I just think the mental component of what happens when you take a concussion, when you get a concussion, I just think it should not be taken unserious. Not that you're saying that at all, but I just want to say that as well. But I will say too that I agree with your overall assessment. I think at the end of the day, it's up to him and his doctors. I wouldn't be shocked if his doctors encourage him to retire, but I wouldn't be shocked as well just because he's made it this far. He's a very competitive person, competitive athlete. I wouldn't be shocked if he says, all these people are doubting me. I need to go prove that I can still be a great NFL quarterback, and this motivates him to be a great player. At the end of the day, too, we don't know what he's dealing with, what he's going through. So, again, I agree with you. There's nothing really we can say that should. We don't have any weight in this conversation, obviously, and it's also at the end of the day up to him and his doctors. I completely agree with you on that. And yeah, I agree with the Guardian cap too. I think that's definitely a smart idea, and hopefully more players, especially players like running backs, for example, or offensive and defensive linemen who are going really like head to head. Hopefully they start to pick those up too, because once again, it's unfortunately a very serious long term issue that a lot of players wind up going through for the rest of their lives, because you can't undo brain injuries.
Yep.
Unfortunately, there's
No. Yeah.
not.
Yeah. You are right about that, I guess. Yeah. You are right about that, and I take back what I said in some ways. But Rafi, you do want to cover over the other injuries that happened this week. I know that some of it is being updated live as we're talking. Especially that's Monday night. This is when we hear back about most of the injuries that happened. Last like yesterday, Sunday afternoon, Sunday night. So Rafi, you want to kick that off a bit more?
Yeah, let's get into the Niners and Rams. I already indicated earlier, but with
Yeah.
CMC being out for likely another 4 or 6 weeks, Debo Samuel also is now likely to be placed on IR, so he's missing at least 4 weeks. Nick Bosa, he got injured during the Vikings game this past weekend, so that's another thing to look out for. The Niners, we saw a couple years that the big reason why the Niners had not won the Super Bowl and not gone on a Super Bowl run was because of all the injuries stacking up, and it unfortunately seems like that might be occurring this year too, just by the key pieces that are already dinged up after just the second week of the season. And then moving over to their NFC West rival, the Los Angeles Rams, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are also now placed on IR. The Rams got completely blown out by the Cardinals. And we talk all about the young quarterbacks. Marvin Harrison Jr., 1 catch for 4 yards week 1. Kyler Murray says, it's not my job to get in the ball. It is your job. You are the quarterback. You decide where you're throwing the ball. And at the end of the day, it's also like the offensive coordinator's job to scheme where the first read should be, second read, but it's still your job to throw the ball to certain wide receivers. Marvin Harrison Jr. had 2 touchdowns, and he has officially arrived in Arizona. But before we get into Marvin Harrison Jr., David, what are your thoughts on these injuries for the Rams and Niners? Because both teams are losing a lot of pieces, and both teams, I at least had as playoff teams, plus the potential of going even further in the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean it's definitely difficult dealing with, especially for the Rams. I mean, you just basically lost your two core pieces of your wide receiver core. I feel like the 49ers are such an agile, like they're such a team that has so much depth. They're able to really adjust their offense. The same way they're able to adjust when Brock Purdy got in. The same way they're able to adjust with Mason in the backfield now. I feel like that's a team that's very much able to adjust. I'm not sure about the Rams. I mean, they haven't been really playing that well, and I think that a lot of it comes down to those injuries to those two players because they're such key pieces of the offense. It'll be interesting to see if they really start leaning more on their running backs to really carry them through. But especially against some of these very tough teams in the NFC West, it'll be very hard to run the ball. So those are my thoughts. I think the Rams are just in a very bad situation, and I hope that those players get healthy soon, just for the love of the game. But yeah, it's gonna be tough for the Rams unless they make some trade pieces or they pick somebody up, or I don't know, or if they start moving some pieces around. There's a lot of things they can. There's a lot of things they can do, but nothing will come to replacing Puka and Cooper Kupp.
Right. And then to close out, I mentioned Marvin Harrison Jr. Davian, we should be very happy that Theodore is not on this podcast right now, because I'm about to post you a question that he would not like. And that is because Kyler Murray is playing really well these first 2 weeks. He played well to end the season last year coming back from injury. He's looked really good the first 2 weeks of this season. Davian, after how the Cardinals manhandled the Rams, would you put them as a fringe playoff team right now? Obviously, it's week 2, but I just want to hear your thoughts. Do you think the Cardinals could potentially make the playoffs? Not win a playoff game, not go win the Super Bowl, but with the Rams and Niners are already dealing with the injury bug, and the Cardinals, with Kyler Murray just looking like his former self once again, I want to hear your thoughts on the Cardinals before we close the show.
I mean, honestly, I'm gonna have to say yes. As much as I'm not. I don't think they're such a great team. Let's look at their schedule. Right, they play the Lions. That's a very hard game. Right. Then they play the Commanders, which is a winnable game. Then the injury-prone 49ers. Then the Packers, Chargers, Dolphins. Dolphins, who have been looking that great. Chargers have been.
Jordan Love, is he back by then?
And I don't know. Is Jordan Love back by then? That's a great question. So, all of a sudden, this is very much the Cardinals could win a lot of games, and they could get into easily, enter the midway point of this season with, the playoffs in sight. So, yeah, I could see them easily sneaking in. I think that their offense is really starting to click together with Kyler Murray and Marvin Harrison Jr. And this really goes – what Marvin Harrison Jr. has shown is that he was the number one best prospect in this draft. And there's a reason why he was taken so early, and there's a reason why he was so hyped up. Yes, it's only week 2. But I'm sorry, what I saw in week 2 from him is what you would see from some of the best wide receivers in the league. And we didn't even see that from them this week. We saw Tyreek Hill absolutely, dud against the Bills. Yes, part of it goes to, Tua and his injury, but also Tua wasn't playing well, before he got injured as well. So, there's so many, I'm really excited to watch Marvin Harrison Jr. And I think so are a lot of other fans across the NFL.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, when I'm looking at the Cardinals schedule too, as you highlighted the first half, their back half has teams like the Bears, They play the Seahawks twice, which the Seahawks are 2-0, but I don't make too much of the Seattle Seahawks. I think they're a pretty average team. They'll probably be fighting with the Cardinals for that 7 seed. So you have 2 games versus the Seahawks in the back half. Sam Darnold still the quarterback of the Vikings. I don't expect him to be playing this well as he has been the past 2 weeks for the entire season. So there's that. And then you also have the Patriots and Panthers too. Davian, I know that you're very passionate about the Patriots, and we all know that my takes on the Patriots have been not very
Bad,
optimistic per
very
se.
bad.
But the Patriots and Panthers are 2 teams that I think the Cardinals could also pull off wins against too. So
I
that
don't know. I
could
don't know about the
easily,
Patriots. I'd halt your horses right there. But all right, yeah, sure. Continue.
but it could be a close enough toss-up game where I think the Cardinals certainly can win at least 7, 8 games this year,
Toss up
which would really be
big,
an
bold
improvement
words,
for
but all
sure.
right. We'll be clipping this and posting on the TikTok once you're wrong, Rafi. And that's
Absolutely.
right. You know, I'm definitely clipping again when Rafi mentioned in our group chat that the Patriots won't get more than 5 wins, and that will be blasted on TikTok through 5 different posts. I promise you guys, you will see Rafi ridiculed like never before because the amount of disrespect this man threw on my team after saying how hopeful I was for the Falcons to do well is insane. I felt personally disrespected. I felt disrespected on behalf of all Patriots fans,
See,
and I
David,
promise you, those on TikTok, you will see me angry for once.
See, Davian, the difference between you and me is in a couple weeks when we do our NHL preview, you're going to say the Rangers are going to the Stanley Cup final, and you're going to say the Blackhawks are going to be one of the worst teams in the NHL. I know the Blackhawks are one of the worst teams are going to be one of the bottom teams in the NHL this year. I think you're a little too delusional on the Patriots. I was generous with 5. I could have easily gone. We all heard my prediction of 2-15, so we'll see what happens. And if you'd like to stay tuned on this Patriots beef between me and Davian, be sure to keep tuning into the podcast.
Yeah,
Tune into our
definitely.
TikTok as well. I'm sure we'll be getting some clips out over the next couple weeks too over this whole debacle. So stay tuned. We'll be talking NHL and NBA in the coming weeks as well as training camp has begun. Hockey and basketball is slowly starting to gear up too. So be sure to stay on the lookout for all that content. Also, be sure to follow us on TikTok, Benchwarmer_sports. We'll be posting all those clips. And once again, for Davian, I'm Raffi. We hope you enjoyed this edition of the Benchwarmer Sports Podcast. Have a great one. We'll see you next time. Bye.
Peace.